All right, welcome everyone. I'm Nicole Cooley, the director of the MFA program in Creative Writing and Literary Translation here at Queens College. And I'm so happy to see you all here for tonight's event, Mapping the Future Alumni Talk Working After the MFA. One of the things that brings me the most joy in my role as program director is celebrating our students and alums' success. So bringing these 4 writers and translators back to campus virtually is a true delight. I also want to say that I was fortunate to work with Mike, Shawn, Roger, and Mike when they were students in our program. And since they graduated with their MFAs, they've done wonderful things they'll tell you about as they make their writing lives. So let me tell you about how tonight's event will go. MFA alum John Rice will moderate the event, which will be run as a roundtable Q&A, followed by audience questions, which we'll take from the chat. And the event should be under an hour. Finally, I would just ask those of you who are not speaking to mute yourselves just to lessen background noise. Thank you. So now, finally, I want to introduce John Rice, who will run tonight's roundtable. Although for many of you, John needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. John Rice is both assistant to and alumni of the Queens College MFA program in Creative Writing and Literary Translation, where he works on outreach and events such as this one. His work can be seen in Hanging Loose, Compound Butter, and Maintenant, among other places. In the spring 21 semester, he worked with poet and professor Kimiko Hahn and the Rosenthal Library to launch an all-virtual chapbook festival, which, by the way, was amazing. He's currently taking classes to become a state-certified English language arts teacher. And I will also just add to that bio that John is so important to our program, having the experience that he brings to the program of being a student and now working for us, and basically just his wonderful magnetic charisma and excellent energy, which I am grateful for every day I work in the Queens College MFA program. So thank you, John, and I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. As Nicole mentioned, I've been a citizen of the MFA program for a very long time, so I'm always really happy to engage with people about both Queens College and MFA life. I think that one of the biggest hesitations people have with, entering an MFA program, with, deciding to make the leap and like commit to your writing for these few years is what to do afterwards. Or as my mother told me, and then what? Tonight is all about the then what. It's all about what 4 of our alumni have done with their, with their lives post-MFA, or, continuing their lives post-MFA. So instead of me telling you who they are, I want to let you hear it from themselves, from their own words and their own mouths. So I want to start by letting my panelists just self-select and just introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us your name. Tell us briefly what your MFA was in, and what do you do now? Okay, Shawn, why don't you kick us off?
All right, so my name is Shawn to Smith-Cruz, but you can call me Shawn, and I work as, I am class of 2015 at Queens College School. I'm sorry, I went to actually Queens College for library school and graduated 2008. And then I did 2015, the MFA with a focus on fiction, which I really, really enjoyed. And now I work in libraries. I am an associate dean in a library in New York, NYU libraries. And I also teach graduate students reference and instruction at Pratt School of Information. And I also have lots of other projects that I will talk about during the Q&A. And now I'm going to pass it to Mike Fu.
Thanks, Shawn. It's good to see everybody here tonight. Hi, everybody. My name is Mike. I am doing my PhD right now at Waseda University in Tokyo. I moved here last year. I was at Queens College from 2012 until 2015, studying fiction with Maza Mengiste and some of the other wonderful faculty here. And at the time too, many of you probably relate to this, but I was also working full-time in university administration during my MFA and kind of continued down that path for quite a few more years until I decided I needed a rather big shift. So happy to meet all of you and look forward to our discussions today. I'll pass it over to the other Mike.
It's nice to meet you guys. My name is Mike to. Let's see, I had classes with Shawn and Mike, which was an education in itself. And when I was at Queens College, I was studying literary translation, and I was also working as a high school teacher. And I had to kind of speed up the MFA. I think I did it in maybe 2 years instead of 3 because I had some transfer credits because I was moving to the Czech. I got an opportunity to teach in the Czech Republic, and where I was focusing on Czech translation when I was at Queens College. And I came over and was teaching at an international school in Prague, and then moved on to working at the university, Charles University's publishing house. And I still do that. And now I'm also kind of teaching part-time at the Institute of Translation Studies at Charles University, kind of as the guy teaching the students how to translate into English. So that's what I've been up to. I've kind of jumped around in a few different roles.
Wow. All right, and now we're shooting to Roger.
Hello all, I am Roger Smith. I am class of 2019. I did my MFA at Queens College with a focus of poetry, studying under Nicole Cooley as well as Kamiko Hahn. I loved every minute of it. Back then I was working at Verizon Communications, where I still am working. I'm now an acting manager there. Looking forward to getting back in the building so I could actually take the position. But currently I'm still doing that, as well as teaching, I would say, teenagers. For a buddy of mine started a program through his agency called Adiyemi Artistry. So what we do is we go into, I wouldn't even say schools. One of them is with the Children's House, which is up in Elmsford, New York. And the other one is with CPS. So we're with, underage or underprivileged, I should say, underprivileged teenagers. The ones in Elmsford that we teach at the Children's House are actually incarcerated. So we both go in there and we teach them poetry, spoken word, and things like that. Keep their mind onto the positive. It was very, very difficult during the whole COVID time because everything like this has been through Zoom. Whereas when you're in the classroom and you're engaging with the children, it's so much better, so much more impactful into their lives. So that's what I've been up to, amongst a few other things that we'll get into later on.
Absolutely, yeah. You all are leading really like rich, full lives right now. Like you have a lot on your plates. And I think that a lot of people are worried, getting out of an MFA program, like, oh my God, like all of this free time that I used to have is just gonna disappear on me. Like, how will I keep writing? What am I gonna do in terms of like the book or whatever that I'm working on? So let's kind of subvert that feeling, and I'm gonna ask my next question. What's the biggest advantage to living a creative life while working in the position that you're in?
So I'll jump on that first. One of my greatest advantages has been steady income. So, constantly you think of the life of a creative, the life of an artist, and you think of the starving artist. So I will say that, Verizon has helped put food on the table for years. I'm married with 3 daughters. My eldest is 20. Scary. My eldest is 20, my middle is 19, and my youngest is 14. So, with that being said, I don't have to worry about, where's the next meal coming from or where's the next paycheck coming from. So it takes a little less stress off that pressure to, I got to get this book out, I got to get this publishing, I got to go do these shows, I got to go perform. So I will definitely say that has helped in that era, in that area, I should say. Where it does pull back from is guaranteed 8 hours a day I'm working. So that gives me less time to write. And then when you have the family, it's even less time to write. So I really have to set focus and carve out time in my schedule, out of my day, out of my life, to make sure that I'm writing and feeding into my passion.
Thanks so much, Roger. Yeah. I mean, there's always giving yourself structure is like a really hard thing to do as an artist. But the stability of of the 9 to 5 with with like a major corporation that you know is not going to like disappear like a startup or something isn't totally important. Yeah, thank you. Let's kind of reverse around the circle the way we went the first time. Let's go to Mike Baugh.
Okay, I'm probably the cautionary tale here, you know, the kind of what not to do, because as far as kind of, let's see, with my own writing, I'm not having as much time to do it right now. And I found a couple different things. One thing is that with teaching and translating, when I was teaching, when that was kind of my main gig, I had a lot more energy for translating and for kind of writing short stories, for the simple reason that you know, you're kind of performing a role, you're acting, you're with people, and so in my downtime, like I kind of looked at translating and writing as downtime, and that was something different than the teaching. While teaching, you're still grading, you're still talking about literature, but I don't know, the kind of the energy you put into it is quite different. So for me, the writing would be writing or translating was kind of a way to come down, and after teaching, kind of performing. Now most of my work is editing, editing academic texts and editing translations. And so one thing that's kind of neat is like, you know, Queens College has served me really well just for some of the contacts. Like I'm in contact with Eric Becker at Words Without Borders, and I'm going to be editing a translation of Ann Poston soon, because she's translating a Czech German writer for Charles University Press. So I work on that stuff a lot, but after spending a long day of editing and editing and looking at translations and sometimes doing a little bit of translations, it's hard to get the energy late at night to start translating some more.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So I may, yeah, there's something nice about doing two different things instead of one thing all day and then after you get off of work.
Okay. No, thank you for that. Because it sounds, you know, at the very least, you are translating and doing.
Oh yeah.
Work. I mean.
Well, that's the thing. I'm definitely putting the skills I learned at Queens College to good use. What I'm doing now with editing, it's no different, really. It's no different than what we're doing in the workshop classes. And then on top of that, kind of why people like having me as an editor and why I'm kind of valuable at the publishing houses, especially what I learned in the poetry classes.
Oh, excellent.
So it's worked out really well. But the idea of balancing your own work with your own creative work with the work that you're doing professionally, I'm having a hard time with that right now, to be honest.
Okay. You know, I think people really need like that honest insight into stuff. My next question actually does talk a lot about using your MFA for things, so I'm definitely gonna come to you with that. But we're gonna spin over to Mike Fu. What's the biggest advantage you feel about, having like a creative inside, doing creative work while you're doing your PhD?
Definitely, let's say, I think it helps as a palate cleanser, because unlike the rest of these folks who are working full time, I have a very loosey-goosey schedule these days, and it's a bit tricky, right? Because I imagine most, if not all of us, one of the things that we really get out of the MFA is that structure of really, organizing our writing lives and giving us deadlines and community, and all those things are so important. I found that when I was working in New York and attending the MFA, though it was challenging to do that full time and then, do the coursework and, find time to finish your stories and whatever. I've always been a proponent of finding, kind of a productive tension there. Like you're able to take the little bits of time that you get and produce the work that you need to. And although it may not be ideal, for me personally, I've also found that having a lot of time to work on something isn't my style per se either. When I have a ton of free time and I think I'm going to spend hours and hours doing this one thing, it never happens that way. So for me, right now, working on my PhD, I have a number of freelance gigs also in the realm of editing mostly, and some other translation things as well. And I think I really like sort of, shifting between these different tasks, because my attention span is only so limited really. And I think, to expend too much energy on one particular task always feels draining. But if I can switch gears after a little while and move on to something else, it feels really refreshing ultimately.
Ooh, all right. You use the phrase productive tension. Am I remembering that right? That is completely brilliant. I'm going to be thinking about that for like months now. All right, and Shanta, please tell us about like the advantages of working working on your own creative stuff while working in your position that you have currently.
There are so many, and I would say that I'm going to advocate for the Academy in this response, because if you think about, well, when I was in school, I was definitely curious about teaching or being employed by the Academy. And I know that for a lot of faculty lines, you need to have a PhD. Or for MFA holders, you need to have a really high, well-published, you need to be Toni Morrison, right? Well, I need to be Toni Morrison. I want to be, anyway, moving on. But instead, I took a role as a librarian, which does have a master's as a terminal degree. And with that, you are on the tenure track line, so you are in need of publishing or perishing. And so that, that stress of writing makes it important to be inside of an institution that encourages creative output as opposed to just sort of the dry scholarly article, although that's important too. So I do write a lot of book reviews and peer-reviewed articles, but I also take advantage of the time allotted and the expectation of publication to produce. And so I've used the opportunity that is given. When I was at CUNY, I was at the Graduate Center for maybe 9 years, and I was on the faculty track or tenure track for maybe 6 of those years. No, less, 4. And with that time, I did a lot of creative output, and I worked sort of tangentially. I used the idea of storytelling and fiction to combine the idea of narrative with archival representations of Black lesbians. And so that's sort of been my through line. All of my characters would come from the women whom I conducted oral histories with, and I would use their lives and push it forward through fictional narrative. And I think that I got grants for that work. It's work that was sought after and really applauded, and I'm still doing it, and it really is enriching, and it also puts me in line to eventually one day become tenure track, although it's also a racket. So I almost, I'm saying it with a little bit of a lightness, like take advantage of the structure while also knowing that it's not real. But that's how I've been able to continue to write. I probably write more as a faculty member than I did when I was not one. So if people are interested and not sure where to do next, look at the Academy.
Wow. Okay, that's something that's great to hear. You don't see a lot of people who are like, hey, I'm writing more post-MFA than I did during my MFA. So I'm really delighted to hear that. And this is also a good kind of, I think, what you were saying is also a good transition to my next question. How has your MFA, the work that you did during your MFA, what you studied, influence what you do now?
One, I think I touched on it a little bit, but the MFA is, what I did in the MFA in many ways is almost exactly what I'm doing now, which in a very good way. One thing was, when I first came over here, I was teaching high school. And one thing that I noticed was when I was in my literature classes, I was so much more comfortable teaching poetry, which was a great thing. I think that a lot of teachers, I think probably a lot of us had terrible kind of poetry instruction in high school, and I certainly did. So this idea of thinking of poetry as a collection of symbols that we have to decipher, while in the MFA you really start looking at a poem as kind of, how does it work? What effect does it have, and how is that achieved? So that was always neat to do. And then so it really helped with teaching a lot. Then as far as going into the editing, the editing that I'm doing is very, it would be the same thing I did in workshops, just with longer texts and with like the Chicago Manual of Style right next to me, which is funny because there's one, I can't remember what it is, but I always come across, one of my favorite classes I took outside of the the MFA program was with Harold Schechter on kind of psychoanalytical approaches to literature. And one of the most common things of like how to cite, maybe cite an editor, like cite something in this Chicago manual is Harold Schechter. So I keep getting reminded of Queens College constantly. But yeah, it was a very smooth transition to figure out how to mark up papers, how to mark up stories, how to make them better. And then, just kind of switching the genre a little, really. So I'm doing the exact same thing. It was incredibly helpful for me. It gave me the confidence to do it. And I've been okay at it, apparently.
I'd say more than okay. But absolutely, that is I think the most ringing endorsement of any MFA program you could ever get. Oh, I think you might have slipped onto mute, Mike. I'm sorry. Who's it? Oh, okay.
Can I jump in? Or
oh yeah, please. I was just gonna jump to you, Shawn. Suggest that you jump in.
yeah, well, I think the question was, how has the MFA influenced what we do now?
Absolutely.
Okay. I would say that part of I have an antagonism with the academy, and I think it has a lot to do with my being in it, but also the structures that keep many Black and brown bodies out of the academy and continue to sort of create divisions of labor and replicate oppressive systems, right? Like this sort of, the idea of having an American dream and doing all the things that it takes to move upwardly mobile economically also distresses that dynamic. And so even though I'm within the academy, I'm always riling against it while in it. So thank you for that. But part of that practice is to think through why we create rigid structures of access to information. And that has to do with my librarian hat, but one of the pushes that librarians elicit is for open access, open education, open educational resources, and really having materials available for people to access whether or not they have an affiliation or have a password to log into, for example. So I also really want to dismantle the sort of density of research and scholarship so that it's inaccessible to people who are not in those programs, right? Like who are we writing for and who are our audiences? And I think that fiction to me is a method of telling or orating to listeners, to the people from an ancestral space. And I always intend to create scholarship that sounds like people talking, right? And it sounds like conversation, because I think conversation is what we have internally. It's the knowing that we walk with, and it's the characters that we create are the people that sort of exist and surround us and create the stories that we live. And so most of how MFA experiences, like sitting in the workshop, speaking to people in circle, as opposed to, with the structure with professors standing in front of a room of people staring at them, but really this communal understanding of learning and teaching. I think it really informs everything that I do. And I couldn't imagine the world without the MFA. And an example of what, I'm going to share a link, because I'm soliciting at this point, to a book project that I'm working on. Well, it's a dual book project, and it's called Queer Conversations. And it really intends to disrupt how information is gathered, how it's formed. And so we've structured over 50 conversations between two queer bodies who identify as information creators, information seekers, and unpack the stuff that makes us seem as if we're othered in any way. And so I think that to me is what MFA embodies, like mastering of fine art, of sharing stories, to me is what can live within the academy. And then I think the academy would be less harmful.
Wow. No, that was just so incredible. I love how you like bridge this gap between MFA and archives and like giving voice to people. That was just incredible. Thank you. I'm not sure, Mike or Roger, which one of you wants to go after that? Wow. let's see. Mike, you're also in like the academy, as it were. So maybe it's a neater transition. How do you feel like your MFA kind of like influences your studies now in your PhD? Oh, hold on. Okay. There.
Thank you.
Apologies.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciated what Shawn was saying, actually. That was very beautifully put. And I think for me, I guess the long and the short of it is my MFA, the time I spent at Queens really allowed me to think a lot about narrative and recognize that as ultimately what draws me to writing and fiction and translation too. I think, these are all vehicles for storytelling, right? And there are all kinds of stories that we tell each other in our daily lives and tell ourselves. And narrative is, a pretty big component of kind of the academic work that I'm trying to put together now. So it's directly related in that way. And, I really think that the time I spent at Queens with the wonderful faculty and other students allowed me to, spend a lot of time of thinking about stories from different angles and, hearing others' perspectives and really parsing and sitting and stewing with these things. And that's a big part of what the academic life in the doctoral world looks like as well. A lot of stewing, a lot of sitting around and reading and thinking about things. And, it's not for everybody perhaps, and it definitely can be a bit stifling too if you're not careful. But I think for me at this point, I'm going into my second year right now. I feel like it's really an ideal kind of life in many ways, and maybe not something that I want to live in perpetuity. I'd love to have some more structure in some ways, but there's enough out there to kind of keep me interested and keep me jazzed up and excited about the work that I'm doing.
Oh, okay, excellent. It sounds, kind of like the PhD is like a really great fit for you, which is exciting to hear. Roger, let's turn to you. How has your MFA influenced what you're doing now?
So the MFA has influenced so much of what I'm doing now. Where do I start? In a small way. With the teaching, I stole some of the tricks of the trade, if you will, that Nicole had us doing in class. Some of those writings. So one major thing that I use is reduce the soup. That's something that Nicole had us do, and it just gets all of those ideas out on the paper, and then you just start the time over, and the children that I'm dealing with, because it's not adults like we were, but they pick a few words and go more in depth. Pick a few more words out of that next section and go more in depth. So it's about the things that I've learned, like stuff like that. Revision plays so much of a major part of how I write now. Whereas before the MFA program, it was I write a poem and that poem is done. And it wasn't really done, but you hardly go back to it. Whereas now you write a poem and you feel it's done, it's not even really begun, so you really have to go back and revise. And those are things that I've learned through the MFA program, that I've picked up a different kind of eye to look at my own work, as well as help others. I've been helping others edit their books and such. But in a major way, the MFA program has brought out what I feel is my best body of work, my thesis, which I am so happy to say will be published in the first quarter of next year by the WordWorks. And similar to Shauna, and I feel like for me, so the MFA program, me just getting a master's, I've been the first person in my family, for generations to go get a master's. So for me, growing up, being born in Brooklyn, being raised in Queens, it's always been a thing of giving back, to Black and brown community, to the hood, so I get a chance to do that with the teaching of creative writing, but also with this book that's coming up. I think as a poet, I have 2 self-published books prior to the MFA program, right? 2 self-published poetry books, but there was still a urge of wanting to be published by a publishing house. Like I needed that. Something in me just said, no, I need that, for confirmation almost that I've made it whatever making it is. So having this book come out and dealing with some of the biggest concerns that I've had growing up in my entire life, dealing with cancer, gun violence in the Black community. So I feel so much of that is so important. So when this book comes out, it is a blessing to tell my story, to tell the stories that I've seen, and just everything through my eyes and through my creativity. So it's also giving back, letting little Black and brown kids know that they can do this. You know, this is something that's attainable. You can go the route of academia and be a writer, be a poet. You don't have to be a rapper. You can be a poet and be accepted amongst your people. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to turn some of that pain into beauty, into passion, into profit, into all of that. So all of that I do owe the MFA program at Queens College.
Wow, thanks so much, Roger. It's just so great. Man, wow. In fact, I think my next question would be appropriate to go to you first with too. So you know, you're producing your best work. You have a book coming out, which I'm very excited to read. I know quite a few of us are. My next question is about carving out those moments of your day to actually write. You finished this book. How did you manage that between like your job and your family and your time doing workshops, giving back to the community? How did you find the time? How did you set yourself up with the structure to do the writing that you needed to do?
So it's just about forcing yourself to do it. You have to force yourself to do the work. You have to. Like, there's no other way. Because if you really think that you graduate and, oh, I have all this time to write and to work on the work, and it doesn't come. So I really had to sit down and not go out, not go this place, not celebrate that birthday, and just work on it. I will say that the beginning of the pandemic helped me because, you know, I'm working from home, so I have more time to sit here with a laptop, sit here with an iPad, and I can work on my stuff while I'm working on work, and then shut down and continue to work on my work, on the writing, revision, what I want it to look like. And it looks so much different than it did as a thesis, but just incorporating so much more. And then to really throw everything off, I actually caught COVID at the beginning of this year, and that kicked my tail. So it just put so much into perspective. Like, you know, I need this to be out. I need this to get out. I need this to be in the world. And, you know, it really makes you think of what is important, and sitting down and having a little bit of time for yourself. It really is. It really is. It's super important. So you just got to force yourself to do it.
Roger, you're a wonderful person. I'm glad you're okay, and I'm glad that this book is coming out.
Thank you.
Let's spin this question around the table a bit. Let's see. Mike Fu. I'm gonna ask you to unmute. Ask you all of them to unmute. How do you find the time within your busy schedule? Even though, as you describe it, you know, PhD is a little looser than other like tracks. How do you find the time to work on your creative projects?
Thanks, John. It's a good question. I feel like, I don't know. I think doing this, excuse me, I think right now, it doesn't feel so much as a matter of finding time as it does of, I guess, I don't know, I feel very compelled to do it, I guess, you know. It doesn't feel like I need to sort of squirrel away a couple hours here and there, more like, how do I build in a sort of rhythm or structure for myself into the things that, you know, amid the tasks and sort of other commitments that I have, where do I find the time to, you know, write or translate or do work in that realm? And yeah, I think for me, I've been lucky in many ways, and I'm grateful to have my current situation and the sort of freedom and flexibility to do that. I'm just thinking about this in comparison to my life in New York too, because for a long time I was in the same boat as these guys, and you know, had less time with a full-time work commitment. But I would say, going back to something that Roger actually mentioned, part of it too is probably, it has to do with saying no to things too. And that's both to creative work and maybe professional obligations, but also sadly to social life, you know? And I think for me, one of the biggest changes I've noticed since moving to Japan a year ago is that here I know few, you know, I lived in New York for 12 years, so I felt very rooted and very comfortable and had a great community of close friends around me, for which, you know, I was very grateful and I still miss very much so. But coming here where I know fewer people, automatically that means dialing down the social life a bit, especially with COVID, with this sort of state of emergency that we've been under in Japan for most of the past year. So that also forced me to kind of spend a lot of time at home. And yeah, I think, you know, dwell in a quieter, kind of slower kind of life. And if there's anything that's come out of the pandemic that has been a sort of net positive, if there's anything at all, I think it has given us all time to sort of slow down a bit and reflect, right? And I think that comes in many forms, and that can also be very challenging and painful in its own way. But I think, you know, reflection for all of us writers is never a bad thing.
Well put, well put. I'm gonna spin this over to Shanta. How do you find the time for your creative work?
Oh my goodness, I'm like writing as we're talking because I don't have the time. Looking down, I'm doing a little, but honestly, I think that collaborators are really the thing that keeps me going. Having someone to be accountable to and set deadlines with. And so even if it's in a personal project, I work sort of alongside someone else doing their personal project, and we use each other kind of as, I guess, coaches. When I was in the MFA program, I did take a playwriting class, and I wrote a play, which was really fun to do. And yet, you know, it was a first draft, it wasn't done. And so I wanted to do more work on it, but I didn't know, I was stuck to do that. And so I had a couple of other friends who, one was in an MFA at Pratt for their first year, and the other was, I think, at Smith. And we ended up putting together a Black lesbian playwriting reading at a theater in the Lower East Side. And so we, you know, got a cast of our friends that we all met on OkCupid. And we got a producer from the collective theater, and we had someone to direct, and we rehearsed a few times. And by the end, when we put on the production, it was actually a huge success. It snowed like crazy outside that night. We were like, no one's gonna come. And it was packed. We had a full house, and people read from the first acts of our play, and then we got feedback. And what was really magical about that experience, you know, we advertised it, we had food, our drinks really, was that it really put the words, you know, as a play, it put the words out there into the world, and they were moving, but it created a community around it. And then it merged. Then I sort of put it online, the first act, and then other theaters asked to put that play on because it was online and we had circulated it. So I think that having the work be alive, whether it's, you know, it's not just in my head and in my computer, but it's moving through, whether it's one person write an email or if it's a production, just having it be a breathing thing and moving it through, then it grows. And so that play has turned into other things. You know, the characters have moved into different realms. And I'm working on a project now that's grant funded with 2 other collaborators that we're gonna take the same format, but we're going to do it in Vancouver because that's where the funding comes from. But the point is that there's like people, right, like circulating the conversation, so that when I'm editing, I'm not just editing for me, but I'm like, okay, this has to work because I have a deadline and so-and-so's waiting for it and they've submitted theirs and I'm late. You know, there's like that accountability factor. So that's kind of how I make time, is I create projects that are accompanying the writing.
Wow, that's so great. Did you say that you organized this partly on OkCupid?
Listen, lesbians have to connect somehow, okay?
No,
yes, there was a question from the audience that said, how did everybody meet? There's like there's like 30 Black lesbians on stage. And we all looked around and we went, wow. And then we realized that we had all met on OkCupid. And all the bars closed. That's what happened.
This is so great. That's certainly more than I've used OkCupid for. So like, I'm just glad that such success. Like, oh, All right, Mike Baugh. I know that we had talked about you kind
Yeah,
of doing less creative work.
in a
Um,
way. I mean, it's interesting. One thing but I would really echo kind of what everyone's saying. I think the three things I would say that do inspire the creative work are debt contracts. somebody who's depending on your work and who's going to get upset if it doesn't come in. It's a scary thing, but it does make you do something. So signing a contract to get something done is good. A lot of my translations that I've been doing lately have been kind of shorter pieces, like 30, 40 pages, so that I can kind of, where I know that I have like a 200-page one due at the end of the year. But in the meantime, those can be good because you get some work done, but you can do it in a couple of weeks, but it won't, I don't know. It's not quite as intimidating, and you know that you can make the time for it. So that can be good. But having the contracts is a good thing. The collaboration is another thing that's huge. Somebody that's excited about your own work it's, to be quite honest, in a lot of ways, it's almost more valuable than the contract. To have somebody that gets excited about it and will show you their work and you get inspired by it and you trade it back and forth. My most productive times have been when I'm either, really, my wife is excited about something I'm working on, or I have friends that are doing something creative and they're excited, they're interested in what I'm doing as well. And you kind of feed off of each other. That can be a really good thing. Then the third thing is the structure. When I've done the best is when I'm just saying, okay, every Sunday, Saturday at this time, and every Sunday, all I'm going to do is translate. And it works. The two artists living in Prague that I'm most impressed with how productive they are. One said something very similar to Roger, and I asked him how, he's a visual artist, and I said, how are you doing all this? And he said, look at my life. I don't drink, I don't go out. Every Thursday, I basically go off to my cottage and all I do is paint and sculpt. And my social life are these artistic events, like when I have an opening or when we're doing something where I work. And then another woman, there's a great novelist, a great English novelist living in Prague, and she's in a position which is fortunate where she just 3 months of the year she basically takes off, doesn't talk to any of her friends, and just writes and writes and writes, and pretty much gets knocks out 75 to 80% of a novel. So yeah, that structure is crucial and something I'm not as good with. So.
Wow. I mean, that is really great advice for, creating like a post-MFA life. I know that like I was really terrible at it, or, am terrible at it for a long time. I'm really just here as like a terrible warning in front of all these good examples. Like, successful people, John Rice, like, successful people, me. So that was really great. Thank you, Mike. So in the interest of time, we're going to jump forward to my last question. Afterwards, we'll have a little time for taking some questions from the chat. So you could start thinking of those now if you want to, ask a question to the whole panel, to like individual panelists. That's cool. We'll kind of read through them afterwards and take a look. But last question from me, my distinguished panelists. What advice do you have for current and future MFA students about life post-MFA? Mike got us off to a really good start, I think, about doing structure stuff, like building deadlines and community and discipline into your life. Was there anything you wanted to return to in that, or do you have anything else you wanted to say in addition to that, Mike?
I guess I'm of two minds, basically. I think there are two ways you can look at the MFA, or two ways you can kind of make it work. One is you can kind of keep it within your private creative sphere, where you have a job where it pays the bills, it gives you a nice life, and then you have the next kind of kind of the William Carlos Williams approach, where you have a job that's not really related to art, and then you're producing art and kind of when you're not working. And I think that can be a very, very productive way of doing it. And I think it can be a very rewarding thing to do. Or the other option is to really make it work kind of to make your work revolve around the MFA. Like I said, the work that I'm doing is almost identical to what I was doing in the MFA, which is really neat. And the other thing I keep forgetting to mention is that I'm also teaching in the Translation Institute, where I'm basically using things I've stolen from every single, from Emil, from Roger Sederoth, especially with translation, and then the poetry with Nicole, and fiction writing with Maza. The other part is that I can't stress enough kind of how well the reading list served me. The exam that you do when you graduate. Mm-hmm. I kind of went all out for that, and really read through things, tried to really pick things up, and it's such a good support. It's such a good base to talk about to talk about literature, to talk about translation theory, to talk about poetics. That it's paid off in dividends if you're kind of working in a literary field in some way.
No, excellent. Thank you so much. Let's move over to Mike Fu. Mike, any advice for future or current MFA students about post-MFA life?
Yeah, I think the one that sort of floats to the top of mind is really about identifying the people with whom you feel close enough to continue to share work after the MFA. And I think it really, one of the biggest things that you'll miss after you finish is having the regularity of those intersections and interactions with your fellow classmates and professors. So I think afterward, it's really good to surround yourself with like-minded writers and translators and poets and everybody else. And if you have people that you can share work with, or form a sort of informal workshop, even better. For a while, when I was living in New York too, I was participating in a monthly workshop with some other Queens alumni, and that was a really great way for us just to keep in touch and hang out, but also to actually submit stuff to each other and read. And I find that that thing is, no matter where you are in the world, and now especially with Zoom and email and everything else, it's easy to do that, much easier than it ever has been. So I feel like there's really not an excuse to look away or shy away from that.
Excellent point, Mike. Excellent. Roger, do you have any advice about post-MFA life for anybody who's thinking about doing an MFA or currently in MFA?
I will keep it super simple and tell them to read and write. It's really that simple. So for me, I didn't have too many poets in my graduating class. A lot of my circles are more spoken word artists, and it's different. It really translates different from a microphone to the page. So I don't bounce a lot off of them because it's just a different audience that we're writing for. But I constantly find time to just pop into Barnes and Nobles, and I'll just go through the poetry section and I'll snag a book, because a lot of the reading that I did in the MFA helped a lot of my writing. So I try to keep it new. I try to keep it old. I'll go and I'll pick up one day a book of Gwendolyn Brooks, of some of her poetry. Recently, I bought a Jericho Brown book and some of his poetry. And, it's just constant reading and writing. You'll get more influence, more inspiration. It'll change your writing, it'll change your topics, or some of your structure will change. So I think all of that is important, to keep writing. Just keep writing. You get caught up in the day-to-day of work and family life. So it's very important to etch out a little bit of time and get some reading done. Etch out a little bit of time and get some writing done. So I will definitely say, when you graduate, or those that are in class, whatever it is that you're doing, life after MFA, just make sure you find time to read and write.
Brilliant. That's great advice. Thank you, Roger. Getting excited. Shanta, let's end this out with you. What advice do you have?
And what are the last things I could say? Sorry, John, to cut you off. I would say to remember that your stories need to get out there. So it's you're alive and you have a duty to get them out there outside of your body into the published world so that people can read it. So it's almost, you don't have a choice. This is what you have to do. This is what you're born for, do it. I would also say figure out your flow, because unlike Mike who sort of has all the time, or Roger who's like little, find little pieces, I was somewhere in the middle where I would like find swaths of time, like for Mother's Day, give me a week, and I'm gonna go to this like little Airbnb and I'm gonna just do that. And then I spend the rest of half the year editing what I did, right? So I always do that. I've been doing that for over a decade. Just find lots of time, find your flow. And I think with that, go back to the work that you've created and polish it, bring it out. Because I think what I haven't done is, like my thesis is still a package. It hasn't been published, but I've taken pieces of it over time. I always go back to it. It inspires me. It reminds me of where I was and what characters I was building at the time. And those characters come in and enter in other places. So don't sort of lose your writing. And I guess ultimately the best thing I could say is be non-monogamous with your pieces, right? Don't, like, I think instead of being married to one and like, really dedicating all of your time to that one thing, I think it's beneficial to give love to each of them, right? And they will come to you when they need you, and you will go to them when you need them, and like nourish all of them so that they can all go out and have multiple projects happening at once, have multiple pieces breathing and living at once. And I think that it'll just all land where it may.
See, this is just such like wonderful advice for everybody. I feel so like uplifted. I hope that you all do too. If you all want to use your reaction like tool down at the bottom of Zoom, CUNY allows you to use applause or to use emoticons that are down there. I'm definitely putting up the applause for this great panel. You were all so wonderful. That's the end of my questions, and I'm just elated. We are definitely going to take some questions from the chat. I noticed there's been like a few things popping up here, so I'm just going to scroll through. Let's see here. All right, because we still have a few minutes. Oh, we have a question from Emil, which is a time question. How do you find the time to read freely? Which, when you do experience the time crunch of working 9 to 5 and such, does come up a lot, especially for me right now, because I'm in grad school and working and just doing so many things. So how do you all approach that? If you feel like jumping in on this, you can. You certainly don't have to speak. I'm not forcing you. But yeah, any answers I'm sure would be appreciated by our audience.
Public transportation is a great one. Just because with editing, I almost feel guilty if I pick up a new book, because I know that there are a bunch of academic books that I'm supposed to be editing and should be reading. So the idea of just the commute in the morning, being able to read on my stupid phone, on my Kindle, a few pages, and then getting addicted and going out for a little bit when I'm at lunch, that seems to be the thing that works best for me. Kind of treating it like a guilty pleasure.
I love it. You're sneaking it in.
For me, I think it's less, I'm reading all the time, maybe too much academic stuff, and it's a bit heavy and dense. And I think reading fiction is a great palate cleanser from that. On top of that, I think in general, I would say get yourself a library card if you don't have one, or make sure you have some access to libraries, right? Because the world that Shawn describes really is so wonderful and lovely. And I think that no matter where I've been, I've always found myself feeling very grounded within the space of a library. And I think it can be very inspiring. And you can also just kind of hang out there too. It's a good place to kind of settle for a while.
Oh no, absolutely. I spent a lot of time in my undergrad just, in the library, in the stacks, just kind of soaking things in. It just felt very calming to me too.
I wanted to just say the one last thing, which is I have been reading a lot of children's books, and they, for bedtime, of course, and it's surprising how much you can get and garner from it's really poetry. It's really, there are some beautiful children's books that have been written, and I learned so much from how a story can have a beginning, middle, and end, and how that can translate to a larger story. So I recommend, if you have no time at all, there's always bedtime.
That's a great answer. I always hear a lot from like MFA alums, friends of mine who are just like, they have kids and they feel like they don't have time. That's a great solution. Thank you so much for that. Roger, anything you wanted to add to this?
I don't know. Just grab a book. Just grab a book. That's the best advice I can give. Any authors that you know that you like, pick up something new from them, or look up something old from them, or just, like I said, the way I do it, like I go into Barnes and Nobles and I just look for something that catches my eye. Either the title of a book or maybe the cover of a book, and I'll skim through it. If I see a few things that really interest me, I'll just purchase it. New poets that I've never heard of, or some of the classics from the canon.
Yeah, I like just walking into the Strand or any place, and just kind of like, oh yeah, this is coming with me. Maybe not for like any good reason, just like following that impulse and just like taking it with me to the register. It's a wonderful thing. Okay, do we have any more questions from the audience? It looks like the chat doesn't seem to have anything coming in. They all seem just overjoyed as I am to have you all here. And it's rounding out, it's about the end of the hour. So I think we should all give one more round of applause to this wonderful panel. You all did amazingly. I enjoyed it so thoroughly. Ooh, I'm gonna use my little reaction thingy too. Love it. Heart. Applause again. All right. Absolutely. So I think this is about the end of the evening. On behalf of the Queens College MFA Program, I want to thank you all so much for coming and sharing this talk with all of us. And hope to see you all soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. That was fabulous. Really great to hear everybody.
Everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys for letting us talk with you all. This has been so much fun for me, and thank you so much for to Emil, Kamiko, and Nicole for everything I learned in the program. It's really, it's been invaluable to me.
Thank you so much for organizing the event, Shawn.
Oh no, God no!
Thanks, Shawn.
Bye. Good to see everybody. Bye.
Bye. See all of you. This has just been so great for me. I'm always just glad to, one, have like poetry and MFA people in my life, just always. So yeah, just happy to do it and happy to see you all. And all of you in the audience.
Same. I think I've said it once before, or I've probably said it a couple of times to Nicole and to Kamiko. Might have said it to you too, John. Anything that Queens College needs from me, I'm willing to give up all of my time and any of my time for the writers of the future, current writers, past writers, just to share this experience, because it was 3 of the best years of my life.
Oh, thank you, Roger. That is I just love hearing that. Thank you. I think that's I think that's like the greatest note that we can end on. So with that, everyone have a great night. Good morning for you, Mike Fu, of course. And thank you all for tuning in. Bye. All right. Oh.